All right, like you said, my name is Chris Ryan. I'm with Local Government Risk Management Services. We're a subgroup of ACCG and GMA with the risk management arm. My name is Chris Ryan. We're going to be going over harassment and discrimination training for employees today. So the first question that you normally want to ask yourself is, what is harassment and discrimination? And it's different for different people, of course. When you look at it like this, it's usually based on the reasonable person standard. Would a reasonable person consider this action to be offensive to them? But now it's changed a little bit, and it's come to the point where it's based on perception of the person. So if they perceive themselves as being harassed, that's why we have to be so careful. So what really happened to us is there's actually 2 claims that cost us $2 million out of court when we first started, and one of them was down south. We had a fire chief that did not like females working for him. He was allowing his captain to take their undergarments and run them up the flagpole. $1.2 million later, it's not so funny to us anymore. Another one was up north, inappropriate information being passed through their intranet, employee to employee. Now, council member actually started the email, resulting in a discrimination lawsuit. $800,000 later, it's not so funny. So what I stress to people is this: what you consider to be funny may not be funny to everybody else. You've got to remember that. And just because a person laughs doesn't mean that they enjoy it. So some things that you might not think are harassment are samples like this. I wish that old man would hurry up and retire. He's just taking up space. Well, of course, that's a form of discrimination because it's age discrimination. Or how about this one? You tell a lady that she looks nice today. Now, maybe at the time she might not think of anything about it, but within time she might start thinking, oh, what was he actually saying, or what was they actually saying then? And it could be found offensive to her. And there's a big difference in saying you look nice today and you look good in them jeans. Also, the frequency level can get us into trouble. We actually had a young man that had this thing that he always told his young ladies 6 times a day for 2 months that she looked good. Well, the frequency level got us into a lot of trouble, and it was a little bit creepy to the young lady. So simply having a policy is not enough these days. The days of giving that policy manual to the new employee saying, read this when you want to, but sign this piece of paper saying you've read it, you understand it, you have no questions, it's not working. Unfortunately, employees don't read their policy manuals. And the one question I always ask everybody is, who do you report harassment to? And I get different stuff, my supervisor, this person, that person, but this is actually the one policy that bypasses chain of command. Most chain of command says, yes, you go to your immediate supervisor, but what if it's your immediate supervisor that just did it to you? You're not going to go to that person. This policy should actually tell you who you can go to, and it's usually 2 or 3 different levels that you can go to. Usually it goes up to HR, the county manager, city manager, or something like that. So an employee must know what sort of conduct they cannot engage in, what sort of conduct they don't have to put up with, and they definitely need to know how to report if it ever happens to them. So the things that make us unique are the things we like to pick on each other about. See, cities and counties are like big families. They love to pick on each other because we spend a lot of time together. And that's where we're finding a lot of our cases are coming from. It's not the physical grabbing of somebody anymore. It's the sayings that's getting us into trouble. And I always give them this sample. Do you have somebody that has a unique nickname and more people know them by the nickname than their real name? And of course, everybody kind of looks at each other like, yeah, we know some nicknames. Then I ask them this: can you say the nickname out loud? And if they tell me no, then probably we have an issue. If it relates to race, color, sex, religion, national origin, disability, and age, it can and will be found offensive. So we have to be very careful here. Like I said, it's not just what we say and what we're doing. We got to be careful with everything. So harassment is a course of conduct directed at a specific person, and it reasonably could cause emotional distress to such person. It serves as no legitimate purpose. The first question you're going to be asked if you ever have a claim filed against you is this: why did you do it? Please have a better excuse than I thought it would be funny, because I can assure you it's not. It's usually words, gestures, and action would tend to annoy, alarm, or abuse another person, but it's got to be based on those protected classes of age, race, color, sex, religion, national origin, disability, and age. And oh yeah, it's against federal law. Not state or local, but federal law. So if we go to court for this, which is very unusual, most things are mediated out, but if it makes it to federal court, We go before a federal judge, and he or she will decide your fate. And for some reason, it's not as funny when you're saying in front of that federal judge as it is when you're saying in front of your friends or your coworkers. So please be careful with this. So you think you're being harassed. What do you think you should do? Well, most policies actually say you must confront the person and ask them to stop. But unfortunately, as you know, some people cannot do that. This is what that available complaint reporting procedure is for. That if you don't feel like you can go to that person and ask them to stop, then you can report it to someone else. But 9 times out of 10, if you have the nerve to ask them to stop, they're going to stop. But unfortunately, the reason we have a policy like this is because that one person didn't stop. Now, I'm not crazy enough to know that it doesn't happen, because it does all the time. But if it does happen to you, write down what happened. Who, what, when, where, and how. The more information you have in writing, the better off it's going to be when an investigation has to be done. But let me stress this to you also. Just because you don't like the person, please don't submit a harassment claim against them. The reason is it changes the person's life forever. Even though they're found innocent in the investigation, out there in the public's eyes, they're still guilty. And a lot of people see that as a negative thing on your city or county. So if you are that unhappy with your job or your coworkers, the best thing I can probably tell you to do is just find another job. Now, what about a coworker being harassed? So it's not you, it is a coworker. Now, you say this is a big family, and we love to protect each other and pick on each other, but we are definitely going to protect each other. Well, if you want to protect your other family members in your workplace, please make sure this is not happening in your work environment. If you see this happening, you go, that's not right. The one way to test it is if you would not say it in front of your spouse, your children, or your parents, it doesn't need to be said at work. So you go to that person and ask them, tell them that you felt like this was harassment, and what do they think? And a lot of times they're like, well, I just don't want to say anything. I don't want to get somebody in trouble. Please, as an employee, protect your employees and everybody else that works with you. Please come and tell somebody about it, because if we stop it at the initial point before it gets out of hand, it could help us in causing it to be millions of dollars in a lawsuit. Now, a lot of people say, oh my goodness, you're always telling us what's against the rules. Maybe what's not against the rules, but could lead into it. All right, my boss is being mean to me. And of course, that's different for different people. Being yelled at on the job. Unfortunately, I have these people that I call them equal opportunity yellers. These are supervisors that yell no matter what, okay? Feeling stressed out by a supervisor, not liking your coworkers or your boss. Well, you know what? It's time to grow up. You got a job to do. Just make sure you're doing a job, and make sure you have respect for each other. There's your key. Being asked to do something you don't like. And y'all, the weirdest one I ever heard was this. We actually had a guy come up to me after class, and he said, you know what? I feel like my supervisor is harassing me. What should I do? I said, well, why don't you tell me what he's doing? We can kind of address it. He goes, okay. He told me go over there and dig that ditch. And I just kind of looked at him like, with a spoon? What are you talking about? He goes, no, just dig the ditch. I said, well, what's your job title? He goes, I'm a ditch digger. It sounds like you just don't want to do your job. Time for a new one. Feeling like your boss likes somebody else better than you. We do not live in a utopia society where everybody gets along. We don't sing kumbaya every day or anything like that. Like I said, respect is the key here. So why do people hesitate to report harassment and discrimination? Definitely fear of losing their job. Georgia is what we call an at-will state. You can be fired for no cause, you can quit for no cause. Fear of retaliation that we'll talk about in just a little bit. Fear of getting someone into trouble maybe you've known forever. You grew up with them. But if you want to make it a safe working environment, sometimes friendships have to be thrown out the window, at least at work. Fear of disrupting the workplace. No sense of humor. Now, just like I said, just because a person laughs doesn't mean that they are enjoying it. They're laughing because of the situation. So you got to be mindful of that. Fear of being embarrassed, feeling less like a man or a woman, or how about this one, the fear of not being believed. I've had many people, unfortunately, come up to me after my presentation and say, I talked to my supervisor multiple times, and he or she just said they didn't believe me, go back to work. John would never do that to you. Well, I tell supervisors, that is your obligation. As soon as you know about it, you've got to do something. It's in your court. So harassment, what does that mean to you and me? Well, it is federal, which means if we go to court, you get on that stand, you raise that right hand and you say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Every action, conversation, and written comment will be looked at. Y'all, they absolutely love emails because we'll say stuff in the email that we won't say face to face to each other, or we'll pass along an email that we think is funny, but is it really that funny to everybody that receives it? Another popular thing in court is definitely cell phones. Now, cell phones, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of inappropriate information being passed through cell phones on a daily basis. So if you have your own personal cell phone, make sure you're treating it just like you would if you had a cell phone provided to you by your city or county. Now, whose cell phone can be pulled? Definitely, if you have a city or county cell phone, it can be pulled because it's not your property. But even your own personal cell phone can be pulled because if they can prove that you're doing something inappropriate at work, it can get us into trouble that way too. So please make sure when you get on that internet that you're not looking up inappropriate stuff, okay? A couple of things with the cell phones, we actually had an off-duty fireman come up on a wreck, videos the wreck, went home and put it on Facebook. This is where the young lady's father actually found out she was dead because somebody recognized her through the post on Facebook and called him because they thought it was a joke. Believe me, that's not the type of phone call you want to receive. So definitely be mindful of anything that you're using. If you bring your own laptop to work, just like a lot of my firefighters do because they're on 24, 48-hour shifts, make sure there's nothing inappropriate on there that could pop up like a screensaver. Some other key points. The victim or harasser could be a man or woman. It does not have to be the opposite sex, of course. The harasser can be almost anybody too. Managers, supervisors, agent of the employer like a contractor, subcontractor, co-worker definitely, and a non-employee. So not only do cities and counties have to protect employees from employees, but anybody else y'all come in contact with. And that can be very difficult throughout the day because some of the times when you meet up with the citizens, they're not real happy with what's going on anyway. Two types of harassment that we usually deal with, quid pro quo and hostile work environment. Quid pro quo is a supervisor-subordinate relationship. That's the easiest way to understand this one. We always have this quote that we seem to like. You don't get your honey where you get your money. Definitely words to live by today. Hostile work environment. There's something going on in that environment that you know is wrong and you wouldn't want your family members to be there. Make sure your work family's not in that type of atmosphere also. So quid pro quo, Latin meaning is this for that. So it's an exchange of services, so to speak. The submission to rejection of sexual attention is made either implicitly or explicitly, depends on the vulgarity of the person. Kind of like this situation. We had a gentleman who had 4 ladies working for him on a Friday afternoon. He calls the ladies into his office. He says, ladies, there's this raise I have to give at least one of you. Who really wants it? I'll be at my lake house all weekend. And he didn't think he did anything wrong, but it's implied of what could be happening at that lake house, and it's probably not skiing, okay? So usually when it comes to quid pro quo, a single case may constitute the type of harassment because it's so severe and pervasive, and it's because of a supervisor-subordinate relationship. Hostile work environment is a little bit different. Usually there has to be a frequency level, a severity level, unless it's so bad like this one was. We had a guy who had a unique way of welcoming you to work. He would walk up behind you, take his hands, slide into your pockets, and move to the front of your body. He wanted to see the reaction on your face when you turned around if you were not slugging him. Well, that only took one time and one time only, but he had multiple claims filed against him. So behaviors that could be considered unwelcome to people. We have verbal comments, jokes, stories, not accepting no and asking a person out on a date. Physical side, like the hugs, kisses, patting, touching. All right, hugs. Georgia is a real big hugging state. We always have been, we always will be. But what I usually stress to people is this. If a person says, please don't hug me, please just don't hug them. Don't put them in that situation. There's a lot of people that don't want to be touched. All right, dealing with hugs, we actually had a husband and wife that was about to have a claim filed against them. What was happening is that the wife was bringing her husband lunch on a daily basis. Before she would leave, she would give him a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Now, when you think about it, you're like, oh, what's wrong with that? I mean, they're married, but it was in the work environment. And unfortunately, there was a gentleman there that said that he'd been sitting there eating lunch at the proper place that they asked him to eat lunch at. They were doing this in front of him. He'd been watching this for 2 months. He thought that this was harassment to him. Now, I don't know if he wasn't getting hugs at home or maybe something else was going on, but he still has a right to feel like he's protected and not harassed within the workplace. So the easiest thing to do is not to allow this type of affection to go on in the workplace. All right. Also, patting on the backside. And everybody laughs when you say that because you're like, oh my goodness, no, you never do that. But it happens every day in sports. And actually, I have a lot of my recreation departments and authorities that have a policy now that says if you coach for us and you pat a player on the backside of their body, you're gone. We don't need you anymore because something has happened to make that situation just not really a good thing to happen around with kids especially. On the nonverbal side, we have gestures, body movements, elevator eyes, no direct eye contact. Now, elevator eyes, you're actually looking the person up and down, but you got a different expression on your face. No direct eye contact does not mean that you're not looking directly into their eyes. It means that you're actually looking at a body feature south of the eyes that is very inappropriate. We also have stuff like suggestive visuals, like your posters, your calendars, your pictures, your emails, stuff like that, and facial expressions, even to the point of winking. Now, if somebody winks at you, it probably doesn't mean anything, so don't read a lot into that. Also, they might have something in their eye, or naturally they blink a lot when they talk, okay? So we actually usually see 2 types of employment discrimination. Now, discrimination can be intended against the group. That's what we call desperate treatment of the group. That is actually when an example would be the city or county says that we're going to offer early retirement this year, but instead of offering the early retirement and allowing people to choose it, they tell you who must take the early retirement. So it's actually pushing older workers out of the workforce. Yes, that is illegal, okay, unless it comes to public services and they have different regulations and stuff like that. Or it could be unintentional, maybe to the point of desperate impact. That would be an example of this. The city or county says this year we got to downsize, and in downsizing, we got to get rid of all of our administrative assistants. Now, typically, administrative assistants are definitely females, not always, but most of the time. So you actually might be going against a protected class of people when you decide to downsize. That's why you have to be very careful when it comes to downsizing and stuff like that. So discrimination acts that we want to talk about, we have the Age Discrimination Act of '67. You got to have 20 or more employees federally to submit to this, but it's discrimination of people, both male and female, over the age of 40, okay? Pregnancy Discrimination Act is 15 or more employees required, and this actually runs concurrent with the Family Medical Leave Act that says while a lady is out having a child, her job is going to be maintained. If there's a raise, she gets it. If there's promotion, she can apply for it. She is physically not there, but she is there because of this act. Because unfortunately, what used to happen is one of the first questions a lady would be asked when she comes to get a job to do the interview process is, how many children do you plan on having? And of course, that's definitely inappropriate now. Well, if she didn't say 0, she probably never got the job and just didn't know why. Or even worse, the lady would be pregnant. The employment would find out that she was pregnant and fire her on the spot. And most of the time, they always say, you're my primary caregiver. We don't know if you're going to be here every day. We don't want to take that chance of not having your position filled if you're out for an extended period of time. This act also helps out the fathers now. It's moving more toward the father side in the fact of the father can take time off to bond with the child and care for the child too once the child is born. Americans with Disabilities Act 1990, this is 15 or more employees required. Most cities and counties have that covered. This is a reasonable accommodation without creating an undue hardship. So what does that mean? Well, an example would be we had a gentleman come back off a workers' comp claim. He was in a wheelchair for a couple more weeks, so he was brought back on light duty. Well, during this, when they put him into my office, they found out that his wheelchair would not fit up under the desk. So what do you think a reasonable accommodation here would be? And I've heard different things like, oh, raise the desk. I've heard take the air out of his wheelchair tires. I'm kind of wondering about that one, but also maybe get him a different desk. Great ideas. But his request was actually this. He requested a $30,000 desk that when he comes in, he pushes a button, it raises, it pushes another button, it lowers back down on top of him. Now, for most cities and counties, this is not reasonable. And plus, this is only expected to last for about 6 months or less. So putting that much money into something would not be a reasonable accommodation. But it can come to what should be a reasonable accommodation. So the Equal Pay Act of 63, unfortunately, we've been fighting with this one for over 55 years. That's where a lady and a gentleman hired at the same time, same job description, doing the same work, and the lady's being paid below the guy. Now, I'm not saying that there's not ways that you can get around this, like if the person definitely has more seniority, if they have different certifications, of course they're going to make more. But it has to be other than sex. And where I usually see it is in entry-level positions, where the lady is being paid below entry level. And my first question is always, why is this happening? And it never fails. I usually hear, well, she's not qualified for the job. Well, as soon as you interviewed her and hired her, you just made her qualified for the job. So it's definitely time to bring them up to speed for a definite cases filed against us. Title VII, Civil Rights Act of 64, 15 or more employees required. It's discrimination of people based on sex for pay and benefits. This is actually a supervisor, y'all, that has so much power they think they have that they ask for sexual favors before giving out pay and benefits. And unfortunately, we've had this happen too. We had a supervisor take his administrative assistant off to some training. While they were there, he repeatedly would ask her to meet him in his hotel room and guaranteed her when they got back to the office, she would get that bonus that she was requesting. Now, of course, that's not something that needs to be done, even though the fact it was away from work. Well, one night she actually videotaped it. Now, when they got back, all we heard was, oh, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And all of a sudden she turns over her phone and we've got physical evidence that's saying that he did this. Now, according to Georgia law, only one person has to know you're being videotaped as part of that conversation. And of course, that was her. So like I said, all we heard is, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And we showed him the cell phone footage and he goes, well, I didn't mean to do it. Well, it's kind of a little late then. Now, the EEOC is a federal organization that comes in to investigate discrimination and harassment claims. When they come in, before they look at the case, they put the case in 3 categories. The first category is this: there's no claim, there's nothing to it. The case is actually closed. The person is given a right to sue letter. They can sue you civilly for 180 days. Next one is they either make a judgment based on the information they have, or they send this nice little letter to your city or county saying, we need additional information. This is how long you have to get it to us, and we'll make a judgment based off of that. Or unfortunately, we've even heard of this one. Yes, I'm with the EEOC. I'm here to investigate. Now, if that ever happens to a city or county, it is out of our hands, y'all. They are there for a reason. They're very good at their job, and they will turn your city or county upside down and inside out to find out what's going on there. And while they're there, they might actually look for other things that cities and counties might be violating that they think of. So please be careful with this one. Don't allow that to happen if you can. One of the greatest philosophers of all time was Barney Fife the Mayberry. He had a saying, nip it in the bud. Now, prevention is the best tool to eliminate it, but the best response is to directly go to the harasser and ask them to stop. Like I said, unfortunately, some people can't do that. That's why we have that available complaint reporting system there to allow these people to report it and not have to go up to that person. So retaliation is broadly defined as almost anything that could make the alleged victim regret coming forward. And I'll go ahead and tell you, it's natural instinct for somebody that has a claim submitted against them to want to go to that person and ask them, what did I do? What did I say? I didn't know I was harassing you. And unfortunately, the EEOC doesn't require them to come and actually tell you about it. It would definitely help. It would stop a lot of stuff in its tracks, but unfortunately, EEOC doesn't require it. It says it gives a chilling effect, and people that actually have a legitimate case or something like that, or feel like they're being harassed, wouldn't want to report it anymore. So what you need to do, the best thing to do, is to not mess with that person. Even the fact of going up to that person and talking to them about why they reported the claim could be considered harassment. And you could be fired quicker for just coming up to ask them what was going on is a form of retaliation than the actual offense that they're trying to say that you did. So please just leave the person alone. How about this? Co-workers who retaliate. So guess what? I know you can't do it. I'll go talk to them. As a co-worker, you need to leave that person alone too, because you can have a retaliation claim filed against you. Plus, warning, current state of law does not allow an employer to retain an employee who is unwilling or unable to comply with this policy. And it simply means this: if we know you've done something wrong, we're not supposed to keep you employed with the city or county, because that's a thing called negative retention. We can get in trouble for that, especially if we know you've done something to harm somebody. But remember this though, the alleged harasser does have rights too. Just because a claim has been filed against somebody doesn't mean they did it. That's what the investigation process is for. And the easiest thing to do, and most attorneys agree with this, is the person that had the claim filed against them, suspend them with pay pending the investigation, just to kind of get the situation separated. And sometimes that's very difficult to do, because it may be getting rid of a supervisor or a coworker or something like that, that you already are short shifted, but it's probably the best thing you can do to eliminate the situation at hand until the investigation is complete. Now, the scenario that we're going to go over, an investigation resulted in an employee being disciplined for harassment. The disciplined employee was mad and encouraged others to shun those who participated in the investigation. You've been asked to refuse to speak to your coworkers who reported the employee's behavior to the supervisor. So what do? This is actually a fellow employee who has come to you and say, anybody that had anything to do with the investigation against me, don't talk to them anymore. And a lot of times you hear, oh, no, that would never happen. I know this person, they would never ask that. And some people actually say, if they did say it, unfortunately, I don't have many friends. I must have just lost me another one, because retaliation is and always will be strictly prohibited. Refuse to participate in the retaliation because morale is already low for the staff, and report it to management because it is a form of retaliation. Now, however, I've actually had people come up to me after class and say, you know what, if that was the person that I knew, I would stand behind them no matter what it took. And I'm like, well, you know, I guess that's good. You're a good friend, but you might actually lose your job also. So you'll be standing in the employment line with them. So please think about this. Make sure that you're doing everything to protect the people that are working there, and don't do anything that could be considered retaliation. So most employers felt compelled to err on the side of over-disciplined employee who violates this policy, because they're not sure what would happen if they don't take care of it as soon as they know about it. Unfortunately, those small things that used to slip through the cracks, like that single picture, joke, or email, you kind of need to use your progressive disciplinary systems and terminate people that way, instead of just giving them a slap on the wrist, because you're stopping something at the initial point. And how bad can it get? I've been doing this long enough to know that usually when it comes to a harassment claim, when we finally do start the investigation, unfortunately, it's not just that one claim anymore, y'all. It's actually multiple claims that have happened over the years. It's just somebody else has never said anything. You definitely don't want this to happen, okay? So the scenario that we're going to be talking about is Roy, the longtime battalion chief for municipal fire department. For decades, he's employed a management style that promotes a family atmosphere at his fire stations he oversees. In doing so, he casts himself as a firefighter father and the other firefighters as brothers and sisters. In keeping with his management approach, he often hugs both male and female subordinates at various points throughout their shift. Tanya, a recent transfer firefighter who never previously worked under Roy's command, she is not a hugger and consistently pushes Roy away when he attempts to hug her. He is persistent in telling her that, look, you just need to understand we're a family here. Family members hug each other, so you might as well go ahead and get used to it. Tanya files a sexual harassment complaint with the city HR director, who subsequently holds a meeting with the city manager, the fire chief, and Roy. At this meeting, he is told to stop hugging everyone. He responds by saying, I consider these firefighters to be my sons and daughters. I've been hugging them for over 30 years, and I'm too old to stop now, so you might as well go ahead and fire me. In aspiration, the city manager asked, well, Roy, can't you at least stop hugging the women? He is sad, but agrees to the compromise. From that point forward, he only hugs his male firefighters. Whenever a female firefighter attempts to hug him, he pulls away and says, nope, sorry, women don't get hugs anymore. After several weeks of this, Sarah, a firefighter assigned to one of Roy's station, files a grievance with HR alleging that Roy is discriminating against her and the other female firefighters by withholding hugs from them. Unfortunately, Roy is in a no-win situation. Danged if you do, danged if you don't. So some questions you might want to think about. Since Roy hugged both male and female subordinates, was Tanya's sexual harassment complaint invalid? And of course it was not. The fact that she did not want him to hug her and the fact that she actually pushed him away multiple times should have told him not to hug her anymore. But unfortunately, he kept going. Now, since Roy didn't intend anything sexual by the hugs, was her complaint invalid? And it's for the same situation. She did not want to be hugged. She felt like this was harassment to her. She actually pushed him away and he didn't want to listen. So of course, her complaint was valid. Now, since Roy would only hug male subordinates after Tanya's complaint, was Sarah's sexual discrimination complaint valid? Unfortunately, this is not going to be valid at this point because it's probably just a one-time thing, but it could lead into something else if he starts treating the ladies different. That one-time thing is probably not going to happen, but you got to remember this too. It wasn't his idea to stop hugging the females. It was actually the city manager's recommendation to stop hugging him. So I would think that probably the city manager would be in trouble quicker than Roy was because he was following a direct order. All right, if the city had known for years that Roy hugged all of his employees, were his rights violated when he was finally instructed to stop? Now, of course, things and times change all the time. So what we got to remember is that what was considered welcome 10, 15 years ago in our workplaces is not considered welcome today. And that could be not considered welcome tomorrow, next week, or next year. So when things change, you have to change with the times. And unfortunately, changing with the times meant that he had to stop hugging people. Should the city have handled Tanya's complaint differently? Well, they did have a meeting, which is great. They were doing what they were supposed to be doing, but they gave him an option of, how about just hugging the men and not hugging the ladies anymore? Unfortunately, when he said that he's been doing this for 30 years and he's too old to stop now, he might as well go ahead and fire him. Unfortunately, you might just have to let that person go because he's not doing what he's supposed to do to keep everybody safe in the work environment. Now, unfortunately, when this happens, Tanya, who just didn't want to get hugged, has now got a 30-year veteran fired that a lot of people probably like. So now you got to periodically go back to the fire stations to make sure she's not being retaliated against or discriminated against even further. And sometimes this may happen for years that you have to go back. Well, maybe Tanya goes, you know what? I know this is going to cause a lot of problems. The easiest thing I know to do is I'm just going to step down from my position. And unfortunately, that might be the best scenario for the city. But let's say this happens next. About 2 months later, you get a phone call at the fire station. Somebody picks it up, and it's the fire station 2 cities over, 2 counties over, whatever. And they said, well, we have this young lady named Tanya. We're about to hire her, and we noticed that she worked for y'all. What can you tell us? Well, a lot of people, and I know a lot of different fire departments, police departments, and sheriff's offices, they may say something that they shouldn't say, like, please don't hug her. You know, she's not a hugger, or something like that. So you got to remember, the best thing you want to tell your employees if they ever get a phone call like that is to say, please contact our HR department, and maybe you can have an open records request to get any information you need on that person. But let's say they do contact HR, and most of the time HR is going to give you a couple of things from their personnel file if you don't have an open records request. Yes, this person was hired, maybe the position they had and when they left. That's pretty much the information that you're going to get because they don't want to give out too much information. And unfortunately, a lot of attorneys have fought with the issue. Couldn't you ask them, would you rehire the person? Well, let me ask you this. If I pick up the phone and you say, would you rehire this person? And I go, What am I really saying? Which is no, I would not rehire the person. But unfortunately, it can be the exact opposite too. You may call me and I'm like, oh, good, you know, somebody else is going to get Tanya. So I'm going to tell you she's the best employee we've ever had. We can't function without her, but we're glad that she went somewhere else and got with y'all. Okay? You take that with a grain of salt. The best information you can get is from the city HR and the county HR department. All right, does anyone have any questions? Well, if no one has any questions, I greatly appreciate y'all's time. I hope you learned something, and thank you.